Sports.
Everybody, this is Don LaGreca from the Michael K. Show. When it comes to talking sports, Bob Walters and Brett Grasso are the authority.
Can't wait.
When it comes to talking sports, they're the authority. It's Bob Walters and Brett Grasso. It's Locked Up Sports, and it starts now.
Bring them out, bring them out, hey. Bring them out, bring them out, yo. Bring them out, bring them out, hey. Bring them out.
Here we go. Bob Walters from the Brian Gunzel Studios. This is Locked Up Sports. We have a special episode for you here today. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Bob Walters. Brett, not with us. He's stuck at work, so it's just me solo here today. And listen, I know you wanted to talk Rangers, and we will talk plenty of Rangers. I'm going to do a show tomorrow about some Rangers, but we have a special guest here today, and his name is Scott Orgera, and he wrote a book. It's Sports Phone. The name of the book is 976-1313, How Sports Phone Launched Careers and Broke New Ground. He wrote it with Howie Carpin. Howie Carpin, if you've been with us since the beginning, you remember us from 365sportscast.com. Remember 365sportscast.com. That place. Howie Carpin had a show, the show that was right after us, actually, on Friday nights. And he wrote the book with Scott Orgera, who we're going to have in here in a minute. And listen, I'm still flying high from the Rangers yesterday. The Mets are a complete and utter disaster. We're going to start to get into them a little bit more going down the road. But I want to get right to the guest here today. It's a great interview. He did a great job. We want to thank him for coming on. Scott Orgera, everybody. The name of the book, once again, if you want to pick it up, and you'll hear it plenty of times during the spot here, 976-1313, How Sports Phone Launched Careers and Broke New Ground. Here he is, Scott Orgera. All right, so now I'd like to welcome in a special guest for today. He spent 30 years in MLB press boxes covering baseball for the Associated Press, Forbes, Baseball America, Baseball Prospectus, FanGraphs, and Hardball, just to name a few. He's also covered the NFL, NBA, and NHL. He's worked as an MLB datacaster. He's the author of the book we're here to talk about today, 976-1313, How Sports Phone Launched Careers and Broke New Ground. He's also pretty smart, graduating summa cum laude from with a degree in analytics from Purdue. Here's the Boilermaker, Scott Orgera. What's up, Scott?
Hey.
How you doing?
How's it going, Bob? Thanks for having me.
No problem. You're analytics from Purdue. We could do an hour on that if we had to.
Yeah, so that was one of those things during the pandemic where I said, well, let me try to go back and see if I can get this degree. And it wound up being a lot tougher than I thought, but I pulled it off. And I figured it could be useful in sports and also in my tech job. And there's a little crossover.
Yeah, I didn't even mention your tech job.
But I had forgotten how difficult school can be. And at first I felt like it was in over my head, but it was during the pandemic, there was time. So, I guess there's some positive that came out of that.
Because people I know that went back to school that like are older now, because there was always the guy in college with a woman in the front row, and she was older and she would answer all the questions because she wasn't doing the college experience. So if I ever went back, which I won't, but if I did, I think I would do much better. I'd apply myself. It's much better.
Sure. Well, that was the big difference. I mean, there was no way. Not only was I not getting those grades back in the day when I went, but I probably wouldn't have finished. It's a different mindset when you're in your 40s versus your 20s. But
and I was going to ask you about if you went with Tim Duncan and everything.
They have pretty good history at that school as far as athletes are concerned. There's Drew
Brees. Yeah, it's a good school. It's a good school. It's not like SUNY or anything like that, like I went to. Although there's nothing wrong with SUNY. Half the people in your book went to Fordham.
Well, it wasn't a SUNY school then, but when I went to Westchester Community College, people think community college, SUNY, whatever. I probably, if I wanted, again, you have to apply yourself. But I probably had the best teachers, best professors there that I had anywhere in my entire life. I mean, you can get a great education out of those schools. It's just what you want to get out of it. Really.
Yeah, school is basically school wherever you go. It's the connections in the different schools. That's all it is. I went to Suffolk for 3 years. It took me 3 years to get a 2-year degree. See, that's what I mean. Like, I don't have to apply myself.
Well, the only thing is I went and I took student loans out in my 40s, which they don't
Yeah.
recommend, but whatever. I pulled it off. So
Hey, listen, I took out. I owed 40,000. I paid 400 a month for the last 20 years. Now I owe 45,000. So it's like that. That's how it is. But anyway, we're here to discuss the book. The book is 976-1313: How Sports Phone Launched Careers and Broke New Ground. I read it. It's an excellent book. A lot of crazy stories. I think just too young to really remember. I vaguely remember Sports Phone, but not really. Like I'm from the generation of I had a black and white TV in my room, but you had to turn the dial to U if you wanted to go above channel 13. I'm from that generation, the scribble generation. Looking for naked women through the scribbles. That's the generation I'm from. Just too young for Sports Phone. But tell us how'd you decide to write the book? Where'd it come from? And tell us a little bit about Sports Phone.
So I'm also from that same generation, right around the cutoff where I remember Sports Phone, but I didn't use it. But what happened was I've been, like you mentioned before, 30 years working in sports locally. And, my co-author, Howie Carpin, who I worked alongside for the past 3 decades, he worked at Sports Phone. And a lot of our colleagues, some pretty big names in sports media, also worked there. So over the years, I kept hearing all these stories about Sports Phone. I said, there's got to be something here. There's just too many great stories. And not only that, the list of alumni was so impressive. I said, there might be enough here for a book. So started doing a little research, put together an outline. And then I approached Howie because there was no way I wanted to do this without him. And he was on board, and we just kind of ran with it. And the thing about the Sports Phone era, like you were mentioning, unless you're of a certain age, not only do you not remember Sports Phone, but the whole idea of it probably seems insane because in order to get your scores or to get your sports news, you'd pick up a phone and you'd call this number and you'd hear a rundown of the latest scores. Sometimes it was 35, upwards of 40 scores in 60 seconds. Be kind of a rapid fire thing. You'd hear news about trades and anything else that was going on in the sports world. You'd hear interviews, and Sports Phone was basically a radio station before sports radio existed. And the difference was you weren't quote unquote on air; you were over at the other end of a phone line. But they pretty much did everything that a sports radio station does now, and they kind of pioneered a lot of that. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, it was like the step before like the 900 numbers, stuff like that, like the 900 numbers or the day movie phone. Was movie phone connected to it at all? That was a question I had for you.
So Movie Phone was a different company, but the company that owned Sports Phone, Phone Programs is the name of the company. And although they didn't have Movie Phone, they had dozens of other lines. They had Dial a Joke. They had a wrestling hotline. They had musicians. Actually, we interviewed DJ Jazzy Jeff for the book because him and Will Smith, before Will had the TV show, before these guys were famous, when they started out in music, they had their own hotline, which was done with the same company as Sports Phone. These guys made, I think it was like $10-12 million over 2 years from this hotline. It was a big deal. The wrestling hotlines were big, as I'm sure you can imagine. They pretty much did everything. They had a horror hotline where you could call and listen to these like 2-minute horror stories. And, they're bringing in professional actors to voice over this stuff. They were very creative. Anything that had the possibility to make money over a phone line, they gave it a shot at one point or another.
Yeah, now it got started earlier in like the 60s, right? But the telephone company was taking all the money, so they had to do ads, and you only have a minute. I mean, 60 seconds it goes like that. And then it kind of died out because they weren't making any money, and then they made a deal with the phone company where they could split some of the money, and it was a dime. Was it a dime per call, or was it a dime? I guess it was only a minute call, right?
It was only a minute call. It started out as a dime. Over the years it went up to a quarter, and eventually I think it may have even been higher than that later on. But like you said, in '68 they had this idea to at least give scores over the phone, but the New York telephone hardware couldn't handle it, and they actually caused a widespread phone outage in New York City because they were getting so many concurrent calls to this. I don't even think it was called Sports Phone at the time, but so many concurrent calls to this number that it crashed the phone system here in New York. So all right, we can't do this. And then by 72, the hardware was good enough to handle a large number of calls. But like you said, the financial model didn't work. So finally, by 75, they had it all figured out. Everyone could kind of split the pie and make their money. and they brought in a crew. There was a gentleman, Bullet Bob Meyer. He used to be the a harness track announcer at Yonkers Raceway, and he was brought in to kind of run the show and hire a crew of 8 guys who wound up including Howie Rose. This is in '75. Peter Newman, who's made 40 plus movies in Hollywood. Dennis McNamara, who, you know, if you're a fan of rock music and the history of rock, WLIR, like McNamara's rock royalty, basically. He started there at Sports Phone in '75. So they had this mixed crew of mostly college age people who either still in school or had just graduated, and they were kind of learning this stuff on the fly. You know, Howie Rose talked about doing an interview with Darryl Sittler on the night of his 10-point game, and you know, they're learning to become journalists, not just give scores. And this now it doesn't seem like much, but back then this was unheard of. These guys were doing all this neat stuff that had never been done before, and they didn't know it was going to work. They just tried everything, and a lot of it wound up sticking, and it kind of set the ground for what we have now as far as updates go.
And some of the biggest names like around in this area, you know, all of them: Bob Papa, Howie Rose, even Don LaGreca. Some people might not even know before he opens our show every day, but he was famous before that. Like, he opens our show every day. We have Don LaGreca, but you know,
That's a good man.
oh yeah, he's great. And it's some of the biggest names in broadcasting. For them to get all them, and they had to learn something there, because there's a reason why they all started there and ended up real big. Michael Kay, like you said, even Gary Cohen. So a whole bunch of, what do you think it was about? Why was this such a breeding ground for you know, guys who went on? Because there's a lot of people that get in this business and aren't successful. These are some of the, like, you got the voices of all the sports teams in this area in New York.
So I think what it was, obviously a lot of these people coming in, they're not known yet. They're just starting out. And Sports Phone required you to learn on the fly and also fit everything into these 1-minute bites. And even though you're at the other end of a phone, you're acting like you're on air. If, you know, millions and millions of people hearing you. And it was a lot of people that we spoke to described it as sort of a boot camp for broadcasting. And the best part about it, if you want to break in back then in particular, now there are more opportunities, but back then you'd have to leave New York and go to a small town and hope that you could work your way back. These guys never had to leave home. They were able to stay home in New York and, you know, hone their craft and learn all these broadcasting skills while on Sports Phone. And then obviously so many of them went on to so many big things in our industry. And it's remarkable because one of the things that I kind of knew when we started the book, but I learned a lot more as we did our research. I would say, I think it's fair to say that not just sports, I think even outside of sports, I've never seen a small startup company, which technically is what Sports Phone was, produce so many household names in the business that they're in. Well, and again, that's even outside of sports. I've never seen this before. And I think, like you asked, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they were, even though it was kind of a fraternity house environment, the way it was described, they took it seriously, and they were forced to learn very quickly a lot of broadcasting skills and journalistic abilities as far as getting interviews and pretty much anything you'd need to broadcast other than play-by-play. They learned there. And actually, let me correct myself. There was a Sports Phone live line where people would call up and actually speak to a live announcer. And sometimes they do play-by-play over the phone for these people, mostly gamblers.
Yeah.
And so they even learned to play-by-play there. So they learned a little bit of everything. And I think another thing that I didn't mention is they also got to cover games. That's the key part. So these guys are getting credentialed. They're getting out to the ballpark. They're getting to the Garden. And, you know, they're going to Giant Stadium. And, you know, part of covering games, a lot of it's networking, especially at that age when you're young. And they're meeting all of these people that at the time were very big in the business, and they're you know, getting advice from them. A lot of people, even when I started, a lot of people pay it forward, which I'll always be grateful for. And so they got this experience in the field, not just on the phone. And I think that allowed them to, you know, become successful in broadcasting years later.
They also probably bounced it off of each other, because they obviously all had some of the raw talent, right? And you put them together.
Sure.
And they bounced it off each other. I mean, they're in their 20s, so of course it was like a frat house a little bit. You know, we all did crazy stuff when we were that age. But they probably, you know, worked with each other, and the talent was there, and they were able to grow it together. Now Sports Phone, it like a lot of other things, like a lot of things today, it was your bread and butter were the gamblers, right? The junkie gamblers.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of them would call every 10 minutes. I mean, I can't even imagine doing that if you're a gambler. If you have a gambling addiction, wait until the next day to see if you hit your bet or not. I mean, that would be crazy. But talk to me about the gamblers, and you spoke to a lot of callers as well. So give me some of that.
So yeah, the majority of the caller base were involved in gambling, either placing bets or bookmaking or whatever it might be. And then you had people that were just sports fans, like Joe Beningo, who everyone knows from FAN. He wasn't really a gambler; he was a sports fan. But he remember calling from a payphone in Manhattan and finding out the Jets drafted Ken O'Brien, and the memory stuck with him to this day because obviously he wanted Marino, and he wasn't happy about it. And we had a lot of stories like that. Sports Phone, Jeff Garland from Curb Your Enthusiasm, he called Sports Phone his best friend because anytime he's on the road doing stand-up back then, he's calling all the time to see what the Cubs are doing. So you had people that, they were in it just for fan reasons. They were calling just to keep up. But the other side, the bulk of the caller base, a lot of hardcore gamblers. And, gamblers by nature, some gamblers tend to be superstitious. So Gary Cohen was saying that he had some friends that were gamblers, and they'd call, and if they didn't like the announcer that they got to give the score rundown, they'd call back later because they were superstitious that if a certain guy read the scores, it was bad luck for them. I mean, you had all types of crazy superstitious stuff with the gamblers, but you also had, some pretty interesting people and some pretty bad people too. I mean, we have a chapter in the book all about Henry Hill and Jimmy Burke and all the guys from Goodfellas, because the Boston College point shaving scandal, 78, 79, they orchestrated that. And Jimmy Burke, who was in the movie, was played by De Niro, Jimmy Conway. They couldn't get him for all the murders related to the Lufthansa heist and all this other stuff that they knew he did. So it was kind of like an Al Capone thing where they couldn't get him on all these other crimes, so they went after him for tax evasion.
Yeah.
So the feds go after Jimmy Burke. Yeah, exactly.
John Gotti.
So the feds go after Jimmy Burke for this, for this point shaving scandal because, well, we can get him this way. And one of the key pieces of evidence were all these phone records. And in the phone records, these guys are calling Sports Phone all the time. And the way it was explained to me by the prosecutor, Ed McDonald, who's also in the movie, he's like, listen, he goes, of course they're calling during the fixed games. They want to see what's going on, but they're also calling at other times because they were degenerate gamblers. So that was one story when we started the book. You don't think you're going to end up writing about Jimmy Burke in a book about Sports Phone, but it took us down so many strange paths, especially with the gamblers. And it was exciting. I mean, again, these are things that when we started the book, I had no idea we'd be writing about. So that was a lot of fun.
Now you guys got some big names in the book. Obviously, a lot of them want to talk about it, so I'm guessing that was a get with them. But I mean, you had like Mark Cuban and just big names. You have Kenny Albert that wrote the forward. I mean, Kenny said he used to call in for he sounds like me. Like I would have been this guy. I would have been Kenny Albert, calling in every day for the quiz to get it right, and then you get 15 seconds to say whatever you want. I'd be promoting the podcast. I said, if I go to a funeral and I do the eulogy, I'm going to throw my podcast in there a little bit,
So yeah, he was a kid doing this, He's a kid running home from school, and he's got all these media guides around him in case he needs to grab one.
And look at his father; he's in the business already as a kid, basically with his father.
At that time, his dad, I think, was the head of local NBC New York sports. It's a legend, Marv Albert. So yeah, legend. But the funny thing about Kenny, by the way, I just want to say this: him writing the forward, it was just so grateful that he agreed to do that. I mean, it was just amazing. And the thing is, between working with him and working with my co-author, working with Howie Carpin, I just feel honored to even share a cover with these two guys. So that was, I don't want to get off track.
And there's no busier guy in the business than Kenny Albert. He does the Ranger game last night. He'll be doing the West Coast, the Western Conference. Then he'll do the NFL. Then he's all over the place.
There's I think multiple times that he did 4 sports in 4 days. And the thing that blows my mind about Kenny Albert, above all, I think he's one of the best announcers in the world. I think it's hard to even argue that. But the thing that really blows my mind about it, because a lot of what we all do, yourself included, we do a lot of research. Like before you have someone on, you do a lot of research. Before I cover a game, I do a lot of research. It's all part of the business. The amount of research that Kenny Albert must do to be perfect in every sport that he covers, it's remarkable. It really is. But yeah, they had this thing called the Quickie Quiz. Just take a step back. And this goes back to what I was saying before, how a lot of things Sports Phone invented, it was on the fly, and they didn't know it would catch on. The Quickie Quiz was invented only because back then, during the afternoons, there weren't a lot of games going on, but they wanted people calling still. So they invented this big thing called the Quickie Quiz, and it caught on. It became one of the most popular things on Sports Phone. And Kenny Albert, as a kid, is just basically destroying all these adults that are calling in, and he's winning it all the time. And, I guess from that perspective, it's no surprise he went on to become as great as he did as a broadcaster. But I just, thinking about those days, and Jack Curry, obviously, who covers the Yankees.
Jack Curry, we had Jack Curry on this show.
Yeah, so and Jack, another great guy, he worked at Sports Phone for a little while, but he remembered as a kid calling the Quickie Quiz. And the best part about it to him is if you won, or even if you came in second through fourth, you get an honorable mention, meaning they'd say your name on air over Sports Phone. And as a kid, like, to hear your name being read out, it's got to be awesome. So, these guys really, the Quickie Quiz grew into a big moneymaker. And, it was basically created as a throw-in to cover some dead air, and it turned into a big thing.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think, I would have thought the same thing, as a kid, if you're answering the Quickie Quiz and you're on there, you're getting your name mentioned, you have to be beating the women off with a stick, but you learn quickly that sports knowledge does not get you women. I mean,
yeah.
Learned
that early on.
Yeah. Now, another thing that, like you said, it was the gamblers. Who were you surprised, like, when you spoke to them? Were you like wow about speaking with that's in the book that you got to interview?
Well, you mentioned Mark Cuban. That was a big one because you don't figure Mark Cuban's going to get back to you. He's a busy guy, obviously, and it was a very brief back and forth. But the fact that he was willing to talk about his role in kind of progressing, because him and his friend created what eventually became Broadcast.com, where you stream sports audio and other audio, and eventually video. So, I mean, that was the start of streaming, technically. But, obviously Cuban's a big sports guy, but I was kind of shocked to talk to him. I mentioned Jeff Garland. I was a big Curb Your Enthusiasm fan, so to be able to have him be a part of it, the list is just so long. And I will say this, what I really enjoyed more than anything else, talking to some of the folks that I know from being in sports, but getting them to open up about this era. I mentioned Gary Cohn before. Gary's great guy. I've interviewed him for other things in the past, but talking about Sports Phone, Gary opened up, and he was just very, I'm very appreciative. He really enjoyed the interview. He was laughing a lot, and not that he doesn't laugh, but you get my point. It's like some people that you don't get the opportunity to have these long conversations with, even though we work in the same places, to be able to talk to them and really kind of have a one-on-one. I enjoyed that quite a bit. Another guy who was great, his memory was remarkable, was Frank Fleming, Frank the Tank, from Barstool. Frank's a character, but he remembered every little detail about the games, that he was talking about, and about his Sports Phone experiences. And even, some of my friends that I interviewed for the book, that they had their own Sports Phone memories, and they never told me about this. A lot of what we did for this book, as far as trying to get callers, was asking a lot of people if they remember Sports Phone, not knowing if they did or not. So a lot of it was a shot in the dark, and we just kept going and going and going until we eventually interviewed 107 people, which, looking back on it now, I don't know if I could do it again. I'm exhausted thinking about it. But between Howie and I, we wound up covering every base, I think, in this book.
What do you think of Frank the Tank? I met him actually, first time I ever met him was about 2 weeks ago at out waiting for the subway after the Mets game. I don't know how to feel. I don't know how to feel about Frank the Tank. He's a weird guy. He's definitely a weird character.
No, I think that's what everyone says. The one thing I will say about Frank is, when it came to this interview, he not only was willing to talk about the Sports Phone memories and everything else, but he gave us a bunch of other stuff that we didn't know. And I wound up, looking and fact checking, and was all 100% right. So he contributed even more than I guess he had to. He went a little above and beyond. I don't know him personally, but the fact that he was willing to do that, and I'd say that for anyone we interviewed, Eddie Olczyk. I mean, if you want to talk about hockey, especially,
he's a horse racing guy too.
He's still a big horse racing guy.
He's a gambler.
He had some great Sports Phone stories from the gambling perspective, and also, obviously he became such a big player and such a big figure in the NHL. But when he was a kid, he was living in Chicago South Side, and he's calling Sports Phone all the time. he didn't want to wait for the Miracle on Ice, the USA, the USA Russia game, because it's crazy to even think about it these days. It was on tape delay, so the game was over by the time they broadcast it, and so no one knew who won except people that called Sports Phone. So Eddie Olczyk, as a kid, is calling Sports Phone to find out that the USA pulled it out long before the game even goes on air. So talking to folks like that, Bill James. I mean, I started in this business working for Stats Inc. So Bill James was just to have him even be a small part of it was amazing. Daniel Okrent, who basically invented fantasy sports, he invented rotisserie. They had their own stories about how they use Sports Phone for fantasy. So I'm grateful. I'm lucky in my job that I get to talk to all these athletes and other folks. But this book was on a different level because I was able to talk to so many different people from different lines of work that had a tie-in, and it was a lot of fun for me.
And it's so different than now. Like I remember, I'm not big into fantasy now. I feel like I'm rooting for players and stuff like that, so I'm not big into it. But I did do fantasy when I was in middle school, I think it was, and I remember going through the paper to get and adding up the points. I tell people that because I still walk around during March Madness, I still have a paper bracket, and I fill it out. Sure. And I have it in my back pocket, and I'm pulling it out, and I still do that. And people look at me like, "Oh, you're crazy." It's on. I was like, "Yeah, but this is how I know how to do it." It's like my father. My father will still be like, "Okay, print out the MapQuest directions." Sure. I'm like, "No, Dad, we're not printing out MapQuest directions anymore." He's like, "No, but print them out." But you kind of get used to the way you did things, and then the new technology comes along, and like kids now, they look at me, they're like, "What are you, crazy? What do you mean you had to? You mean it doesn't just add up the numbers right there?" I'm like, "No." Yeah. I sat there every night going, who had catches, how many yards. It was crazy. It was crazy, but we did it because we love sports, and it is what it is. Now, one of the funny things that I thought that made me laugh when I was reading the book is they'd make things up sometimes. They'd say if it was early in a basketball game and they didn't have a score from the Knicks and the Clippers game or something, they'd be like, "Well, it's 6-6." Because eventually they were going to both pass 6-6. I thought that was funny. I was laughing, and also that some of them used pseudonyms. Like Bob Papa, I believe, used when he was doing Down South. When he was doing a Down South Sports Phone, he used a fake name.
Yeah. So the first thing, as far as making up the scores for the NBA games, when they first, going over the chapter and writing, and I'm like, it felt like it was a joke. Like you didn't. And no, we actually really did that because the stringer didn't call in. And the thing was, eventually it'll reach that score. So, which these days you wouldn't get away with that kind of crap. But as far as what was the second?
The music pseudonyms.
So the pseudonyms thing, everyone that we talked to thought it was ridiculous, and it was one of those things where the down south lines, like New Orleans, they had lines everywhere, and they were saying some of the southern lines they don't want to hear names that are like New York names or whatever, which was insane. So like you said, Bob Papa had to change his name, Howie had to change his name, a whole bunch of them. There was Peachtree Pete, Bourbon Street Bob. I mean, all these ridiculous names.
Yeah. Like it's like a porno, maybe. Like it's a porno or something.
Yeah, exactly. and there was, and I don't remember. It might have been Steve Cangelosi. It was so one of the guys that was on multiple lines because you'd be in the booth and you'd do a rundown for, say, Atlanta. You'd hang up, then you'd do a New Orleans rundown. You're going back to back with these rundowns, and you have to use different names for each one sometimes. So they were like, I forgot who the hell I was. At one point, I think it was Charlie Slows, and said, "Forgot who I was on Sports Phone," because you're doing so many cities in the same night. But yeah, there were some interesting things that they were forced to do. The nickname thing was a little strange. But one thing, just really quickly about nicknames, the most famous nickname when it comes to Sports Phone is King Wally. Mike Olszewski, who's the PA at the Garden. He's been a PA at the Garden for a long time now, and his nickname was something that he had gotten while he was at Fordham at FUV, and it never really caught on. But when he went to Sports Phone, the boss was like, "Listen, we need some nicknames." And he's like, "All right, let's try King Wally." And now if you ask anybody about Sports Phone, first thing they say is, "I remember King Wally." That name just stuck because he was on air a lot during the main times on the New York line, so everyone remembered his voice. And
takes 6 seconds just to say his name, too. He doesn't have that time on Sports Phone,
Exactly.
And people still use pseudonyms today. I mean, look at I know. I think Richard Neer is not his real name. I think Jody Mack, who works in Philadelphia and on WFAN. I don't think that's their real names. And even Bob Usler, who's a friend of mine, He used I dug it
He's
up when I
Mr.
was
Met,
doing
right?
research. What?
And Bob User was Mr. Met at one point.
No,
when
he was
when
Mr.
on-
Men on Mike and the Dog. He
Yeah.
used a pseudonym when he worked for a
Oh, he
separate.
did?
Yeah, and I dug it. I found an article when I was looking up before I had him on the show, and my cousin works at ESPN, and I called up my cousin. And he goes, "I remember that." And it was one single article, a little thing, and I brought it up during the interview, and he's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you found that." He's
Wow.
like, nobody knows that. So I was like, I was like, oh, impressed with myself there. But yeah, a lot of people use pseudonyms. You know, it is what it is. They don't want to be working because they can't work for two competing radio stations
Yeah, it's
as
true.
the same guy, you know, and that's how it is. Now, you covered baseball, right? And now, was it hard to? You took off time, right, for a year. I met for people who don't know, I met Scott like 2 years ago at a birthday party. My wife
East
worked
Bronx.
with my wife worked with one of your friends' husbands or something, right?
Yeah.
Yep. And we met. She's like, "There's going to be a baseball writer there," and I told you about the show, and you're like, "I'm writing the book. I'll be on by the winter meetings." That was 2 years ago. So now here we are.
Yeah, it's a little longer than we thought.
It took you a long time
I'm glad
to
you
do
brought that up because so what happened, I was at my other job, my tech job for 24 years. I got laid off last February, just out of nowhere. But it turned out to be a blessing because I pretty much made the book a full-time job from then until this April. So Howie and I have been working on the book for a while, but me getting laid off from my full-time gig, as jarring as it was, it gave me the opportunity to basically dive into this full-time. And I did. I mean, it was a lot of work, but it was worth it because in the end, I think if that hadn't happened, the book may not be all it could have been. I mean, even when Howie and I first started, we figured we'd interview 30, 40 people. We might cover the history of sports phone, and maybe that's it. But, as you can see, it's almost 500 pages. We wound up going down a lot of roads we didn't expect to, and it turned into this big, heavy thing that we have here.
Yeah, when you can pour yourself into it like that, you're going to get the best. And you obviously have a history of writing, and you've done a million different things, writing for all different types of sports. How did you get into the business? Was that something you went to school for? Was it a happenstance?
So the way I got in, this is crazy. I don't think this could happen today, but I was still in high school, and I saw an ad in the back of, I believe it was the Sporting News, and it was for a company called Stats Inc., who wound up becoming pretty big years later. And they were hiring people. This is going to sound so strange. When I describe it, I don't even believe it myself. So and again, I had the same TV as you with the knob and, old school.
Yeah.
I live in Yonkers, North Broadway. And
The antenna,
people,
fixing the antenna.
yeah. and so what they were having people do is you'd record games on the VHS. You would tape games. It was baseball at the time. And they sent these really complex score sheets where you record everything, every pitch, every throw to first. I mean, everything that happens in the game, the trajectory of the ball. I mean, if you see Jonah Hill pitch charting in Moneyball, I was doing that before Billy B and Moneyball was even a thing. I mean, but they were paying, I think it was $8 a game for me to watch the recording of these games and basically chart every single thing that happens and then mail it back in. I'm mailing a piece of paper back to Stats. and they were compiling all these records. So at the end of the year, they would sell it to teams and people that were interested in these. At the time, the forward analytics, it didn't exist. What we have now wasn't around back then. So I did that for years. And then another thing they had me do a couple of years later was I'd be a backup. So if someone was at the Garden covering the Knicks game for Stats, I'd be home watching the game on TV, typing in every play, every pass, every foul as it happens, in case the feed goes down at the Garden. I did that for years. And it paid nothing. Nothing. I mean, it was less than the minimum wage. But, something in my mind was, and I was working another job. I was working at McDonald's or Burger King at the time. And something in my mind was like, at least I'm in sports. I don't know what this is going to, I didn't think it would lead to anything, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm getting paid a few bucks to watch a game. And, I've always had multiple jobs. So let's go for it. So then 95, this was like such a big moment in my life. 95, towards the end of the baseball season, one of the New York Stats guys who's working in the press box gets sick. And by that time, I had done backup for baseball from home for them for a while, as well as the other sports I mentioned. And they're like, well, can you cover, a few games here at Yankee Stadium? Now, laptops back then were very expensive. Nobody had laptops. This is 1995. And it's not like we had a bunch of money to just throw around at home. So I bring this to my parents. I'm like, listen, I have this opportunity to go work in Yankee Stadium, Shea Stadium, which seems surreal, but I'd need a laptop. And God bless my parents, because they went ahead and they bought me a laptop. And if they hadn't done that, and again, it was only for a couple games. No one knew it was going to lead to a career. But if they hadn't done that, I would have never gotten the opportunity to walk into the ballpark and cover those games. And next season it carried over. They invited me back. You start meeting people. You start doing other things. You run quotes. You interview players. And it just built up over the years. But if I hadn't, two things. If I hadn't answered that ad while I was in high school in the back of the Sporting News, and if my parents hadn't gotten me a laptop in '95 just to cover a couple of games, none of this happens.
And
None
if the
of
guy
it.
doesn't get sick, right?
I didn't get in the traditional way.
If the guy doesn't get sick either, it's like Wally Pipp and Lou Gehrig, right?
Yeah. And you know what's funny? It really is, because that guy, unfortunately, he never came back to the regular rotation. So I wound up getting a lot of games the next season, which was '96 with the Yankees was crazy. And I covered a lot of Met games then too, and I got used to covering both ballparks, both teams.
No, those mid '90s Mets were god awful.
Yeah, the late '90s were a fun team.
The late '90s, but those mid '90s teams were terrible. But listen, nobody would know Wally Pipp either. The only reason we all know Wally Pipp is because of Lou Gehrig. So you stepped in, exactly. And the guy never got back in the lineup.
Yeah, and it's again, these are things that happen in your life where it wasn't a plan. I didn't have any connections. I didn't know anybody in the business. A lot of times you need to connect. I am a connect. I didn't know anybody that was working there, but it just, you know what the lesson would be, I guess, if anyone's watching, younger people looking to break in. The one thing that I did from the beginning, and again, when I was doing this backup stuff from home, you got to understand, I'm a teenager. Everybody's out in the park, drinking 40s and doing things you shouldn't be doing. And I'm running home for $10 to be a backup on the Nets game on like a Saturday night.
Yeah, but that's great.
And I remember,
I did the same thing.
Thing is, I took it seriously, and I never missed a game. I never said no to an assignment. So I think that me taking it seriously and understanding that it was a privilege, especially to be in the press box from the beginning, it helped me. And a lot of people that I worked with helped me get comfortable there. And I mean, you talk about Bob Shepard, Eddie Layton, the late Bill Shannon, who was an official scorer, was a mentor of mine. I mean, these are people that, I'm a scared teenager. I'm in the Yankee Stadium, in the Shea Stadium press box. To this day, I still can't believe they pay me to go there. But back then, and I look like I'm 12 at the time, and I remember just being nervous and not being able to calm down. And even Ralph Kiner. I mean, you're talking about people that are legends going out of their way to make me feel like
talk about somebody drinking 40s, right? Talk about somebody drinking 40s, Ralph Kiner.
Exactly. So it's crazy how, and again, this is my 30th year, but it's crazy how I ended up here. But I think a lot of the credit obviously has to go to my family, but also people like Howie and people in the business that kind of took me under their wing and taught me things when they didn't have to. A lot of the folks at the AP, Ben Walker, Ron Blum, Mike Fitzpatrick, Howie Rumble, all these guys. I mean, we'd be on for 3 hours if I start naming names. Yeah. But these are people that paid it forward that didn't have to. And so I try to do that now because, it's the right thing to do. People did it for me. So
yeah, and you know what? And if you're watching or you're listening, and it is tough to break in. I just for me in this little thing, like I started this, and I remember when I first said it, I wrote on like a thing that I put on Facebook. I was like, and interviews with the biggest names in New York sports. And my friend, one of my best friends, who I love to death, and he loves me, he's like, give me a break, biggest name. And I was like, okay. And if you just start meeting people and you start asking them, last year I was in the press box at Citi Field with I know Cosell, the PA announcer at Citi Field. I walked into the press box and a couple of the guys were like, "Oh yeah, we seen your show." I was telling you before, Scott Farrell told me he watched the show, and I was like, I was blown away. And if you just ask these people to come on, they'll come on. There's a lot of people that like Howie Carpin. He's like a legend. I never even really heard of him before I did the 365 Sportscast with Mark Roseman. And he had a show on
Howie and Mark had written a bunch of books together.
Yeah. They do the Rangers books. Isn't Howie an official scorer as well? He
is, and that's actually where he is. What time? Yeah, he's at Citi Field right now, getting ready for a game.
Scoring an error on Beatty somewhere,
Yeah. It's been tough to watch. I feel bad for you, Met fans, right now.
It's all right. It's not. I tell people all the time, like it's not something I chose. I didn't choose to be a Mets fan. Why would you ever choose this?
You
All
sound
I
like
have.
you sound like Benigno now.
Yeah, oh yeah. No, Benigno's a little crazy now. Trust me, we had Benigno on here too. He's a little crazy, but
One of the things he said during the interview for the book, he's like, listen, the one thing that I never allowed to happen, and I unfortunately my fandom had to take take a seat, and because I can't be a fan of a team anymore. I grew up a Yankee fan,
Okay.
but Benigno in his position, he said, he goes, the one thing I never wanted to happen, and I didn't let happen, was stop being a fan of my teams. And to his credit, he's not exactly objective. He loves his teams.
Yeah. And it's probably is why he's a little crazy now. Did you hear him when he's doing his podcast and he left the thing on?
For you guys. Well,
He's great. He's great. He did his podcast last week, and he does it, I guess, from his basement. And he left the tape running when he thought he had a technical difficulty. And when he put the podcast out, it went out. And he's in there cursing at the dogs, and he's cursing at his wife. Oh, he's the best.
He is. He was another guy. He talked about people giving their time.
He was a caller.
He called me on a Sunday morning. He probably had a million better things he could have been doing. And he gave a good interview. So it's just, I don't want to keep repeating it, but this book, without, 107 people, without the people that gave their time, and without people now like yourself that actually want to talk to us about it, this book's nothing. So it's about the people. And I think that kind of carries over to anything in this business.
Of course it does. I mean, imagine anyone out there listening. Imagine a job that you had when you were 20 years old. Imagine someone random came up to you and said, hey, you want it? For me, it would be Patchogue Car Wash, okay? Someone came up and said, hey, I'm writing a book about the Patchogue Car Wash. I'd be like, come on, sit down. I got 3 hours for you right now. Sure. And we'd be able to write a book about it. It's any job you can write a book about. And this one just happened to be a bunch of highly successful in the business, names that everybody knows. I mean, it's crazy that all these names came together like that. And the book is excellent. I love it. Now, what are you doing? What are you doing? Tell us where we could get the book, first of all. Tell us where we can get the book. Tell us where they can find you.
So the book's available pretty much everywhere, Walmart, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. But if you want to learn more about it, and you could also order, there are buttons there that'll take you to the vendors directly. Our website is 9761313.com. And again, that's the name of the book also. So if you look it up, 9761313. As far as myself and Howie, if you go to our website, all of our contact details are on there, our social handles, everything else. And the one thing that I would say, anyone that might be on the fence about if they'd be interested in the book or not, check out the website, because one thing that we can't do on shows like this, because there's a time limit, is we can't go through all the names. But in the website we do. And I think if you see the list of people, you'll be blown away, and that might kind of convince people that it's worth a read.
Yeah, it's crazy. You know every name, almost every name. You know, I know every name, and if you're a sports fan, like you said, like you used to go home and do the Nets game and do the stats, like Howie, Gary Cohen would sit in the upper deck with a tape recorder. I would sit at home and just announce the game to myself. There are people like us out there. We're not as crazy and weird as we think. But what was I going to say now? Oh yeah. Let me ask you this: did you try calling what area code was it? 212?
It was 212, and eventually they had other area codes. It was Chicago, it was Detroit, but it started as 212.
Did you call the number? Did you call the number?
Yeah, of course. So I called. I couldn't. It looks like there's nothing. No one's using it. But then I tried for months. Tried to buy it. I was trying to find ways, because you can buy some numbers. I wanted to buy that number so we could use it for promotion. If you call it, you hear the book. But we couldn't get it, unfortunately. But that was one of the first things I tried is calling the number.
It's like sex.com. Like, you can't get it anymore. You can't get sex.com. Yeah. It's the first one off the board.
The number might be worth a lot of money, but yeah. So the funny thing about that number, though, quickly, is everyone that we talked to, people that called, people that knew about it, no one forgets the number. Everyone remembers 9761313, and that's kind of why we made it the title of the book, because you would think that people would remember sports phone, but not the number. But everyone to a T remember the number.
No, you remember certain numbers. You know Celino and Barnes. Cars for Kids number. Everybody, there are certain numbers everybody knows.
I wish I didn't know Cars for Kids. That commercial's on every 10 minutes.
You know another one you know? You know another one you know? You know Empire Carpets, I bet. 800-588-2300.
Yeah, see? All right.
Empire.
The song was going in there.
See, you know it.
So
you knew it. You just didn't know you knew it. Yeah, well, of course it works. Of course it works. And like you said, I didn't know the number, but now I know it. the sports phone. But it's an excellent book. Listen, I talked to you about the Mets, but there's really nothing to talk about. Their play speaks all for itself. I mean, and the worst part is the Mets are irrelevant. The Mets are going to be irrelevant before the Rangers are done here. And it's not even, they couldn't even get us to Memorial Day. I wrote on Facebook, I know you saw it, that Diaz looks like Benitez. Last night's just the topping on the cake, a grand slam, down up 3 in the 8th inning. I mean, it's a rough life. And the one saving grace I have is that I'm a Giants fan, okay? Which is not good now, but it gives me something.
It was. We had me
Yes.
too, and we had a pretty good run for a while there. I mean, it's not nearly as bad as the Jet fans.
And Yankee fans don't appreciate the Giants run because they're God given to go to a parade every year. Those pompous damn Yankee fans.
I'll tell you one thing, and not because he's on the Yankees, but my favorite. If you asked me even last year, my favorite player to watch, not even to cover whatever, just play to watch. It's been Juan Soto. So now him being here in town, I just like that I get to see him play more often because he's just it's like every pitch is a war for him, and he's just a remarkable player. So, and even next year, like I don't, because of my job, I don't root for either team anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I do root for is to see good baseball. So when players like that come to New York, whether it's in Queens or the Bronx, it makes our job a lot more fun because you get to see the guy on a regular basis. Like I was hoping Ohtani would land on one of these clubs just so I could see him play more often.
Yeah, but Ohtani's he's so unlikable now. He's turning himself to be so unlikable. I mean, just with the home run ball thing that he pulled, and he lying about meeting the girl, and he's doing the gambling thing, which I don't think he was gambling on the games, but his buddy, and then to throw his buddy under the bus, they didn't make an arrest for. He's very unlikable, Ohtani. I think, at least to me.
Well, one thing about him, I don't want to bash him because I'm not a beat writer that covers him directly, but I've heard stories that let me put this the right way. He's difficult to wrangle sometimes after an outing or after a game. He doesn't speak to the media as often as he probably should, considering his status. And I'll say that the problem with that. And again, I don't cover him, so I don't want people bashing me for saying this. It's just what I've heard. Might not even be true. But the one thing that I will say, when a player, especially starting pitcher, if you that was your game, when a player doesn't stand in front of his locker and face the music and answer questions, forget about what it does to us that we can't get quotes. No one cares about that except us and our editors. But where it's really a problem is your teammates then have to stand there and answer for you, whether it be your catcher, whether it be the captain of your team, whoever. And that's not something people talk about too much. I'm not going to name any names, but there have been a lot of players in this town over the years that would skip out if they had a bad outing. They wouldn't talk to us. And then, okay, that's fine. But now you're leaving your teammates to stand there and answer questions for you. It's just not fair. That's why I always had a problem with that.
Yeah, and like you said, now what do you think about you're an analytics guy, clearly, right? Are you in favor? Do you use those new stats, the WAR and the stuff like that, all the trajectory, the ball speed, launch angle and all that? What do you think about that stuff?
I think that it plays a role, and I think that it's useful if you don't make it everything. I think that if you use it to give context to maybe a point you're trying to make, or if you use it just to get an idea about certain players that you might not see regularly, I think that it has its uses. I think the problem comes where I feel like it's just like everything else these days, where you're either on one side or the other, no matter what we're talking about. Unfortunately, there's no nuance. So you have people that will be like strictly analytics, nothing else. And then you have people that'll be strictly eye test, strictly scouting, no analytics. And I think they're both wrong. I think there is, and this is an easy answer, but I think it's true. There is some middle ground where if you utilize analytics to a certain extent, I know a lot of players that say that they'll use the numbers and they'll use the analytics and they'll watch video, but at a certain point they'll stop and just let instinct and their basically talent take over. So it has its uses, but I think overkill, if you use it too much, you can, just drown out the actual message and almost forget that that you're playing a game. I will say this quickly. One thing that the prevalence of analytics in front offices has done, and I don't blame the teams for doing it. You have to stay competitive, but it's changed the game itself. It's okay to strike out 3 times in a day as long as you hit a homer. And if the numbers back up, which in a lot of cases they do,
They do to back
this,
it up.
that this is a winning formula. Okay, fine, I get it. They do. You're right, but it also doesn't make for a very interesting game. Now, I will give credit to the league. The rules changes that went in over the last couple of years. Baseball is much more watchable now, and it's a lot more fun than it was for a while there. So I think that they're trying to head back in the right direction to make it interesting for fans because you shouldn't have any sport where there's literally nothing happening for minutes at a time, and baseball has been that for a while. But now it's gotten way better.
I love the pitch clock.
Has worked out.
Love it. And it also has made the players soft. I mean, like, did you see? You probably might not have seen it a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago. McNeil got slid into by somebody. He overslid the base, and McNeil's crying and look at
it was someone on the Phillies.
Yes, it was. And go watch. And then I was watching a week later of some tape of like Willie Randolph getting thrown into short left field. Nothing. No argument.
You had to stand in there. Second base was a tough position back then because
stand in there.
But that was part of the game. And I'm okay with some of the rule changes that are meant to stop guys from getting hurt. That's fine. But when you take it too far, I have certain issues with the home plate rule, the Buster Posey rule. Not that they put it in place. I think it was necessary. CTE is no joke, but the way they implemented it and how sometimes it can be very even gray to this day as far as whether or not a guy should be standing where he is or should be. I think that the league's trying, so I'll give them credit for that. But I don't think that they test these out enough in the minors before they implement them in the big leagues. I think that they move all right, you're going to see robo-umps soon for balls and strikes.
How many games does Angel Hernandez have to blow before we get some robo-umps? Did you see the call the other night? What did you think about that? The infield fly thing. You saw that, right?
Well, Angel, I did. But the thing, Angel Hernandez in general, and I just want to say for the record, I don't know Angel, so I don't have any personal problem with the guy. But
I do.
I do. No, but I think it's fair to say that he makes so many glaring mistakes, especially in recent times, that if I did that in my job, you did that in your job, we wouldn't be working anymore. And I don't like to call for people to get fired, but this has been going on for so many years. The thing that I don't understand.
Why does he have to work the plate? Why does he have to work the plate? Why do they all have to work the plate? Can't you have a home plate umpire? Why do they have to rotate around? I mean, come on.
Well, so here's the thing, and here's where it would get tricky. So I can't imagine, and they have a pretty strong union, I can't imagine if it was suggested to Angel, okay, you're in the rotation, but you're not going to work with the plate. I don't think he'd be okay with that. But that would be one.
He'd sue them for discrimination.
He did sue.
I know.
So, it's a mystery to me how he's still doing big games. I don't get it. And I hate to say that about anyone's job, but he's way off.
Yeah, it's not even close. And why not have the robotic umps? I mean, we have the robotic umps.
I would say 2026. You're going to have it. I'd say 2 years from now.
And because of the union, they'll still sit there. They'll just get buzzed, right?
Yeah. There will be an umpire back there. But you know what? If the technology has reached the point where it's 99% accurate, whatever they say it is, I'm all for it. You're not taking away a job. The ump will still be back there. It's just why not get it right if you can?
Now let me ask you this, okay? You have nobody on base, less than 2 outs. Less than 2 strikes on the hitter, right? Why do you have a catcher?
That's a good point. I never thought of that.
Something that bothers me for a long time, to be honest.
I know. Well, let's think. There's got to be a reason. The only thing I could think of,
because the umpire get pissed at you.
No, is a swing and a miss, strike 3 in the dirt. So the ball gets away.
Less than 2 strikes. Less than 2 strikes. Oh. You put the catcher back there with 2 strikes, right? Why not put a 10th guy out, 9th guy out in the field behind you?
You know what? I don't want to say there's got to be a reason. I can't think of one off the top of my head. And I've never heard anyone say that before.
Yeah.
I think you might be onto something there.
When next time you're in the city field, let them know that I'm bringing stuff to the table like this.
Look, who I want to? He'll probably end up watching this, but I want to ask Howie. Howie's like the senior official scorer, and he. If Howie doesn't have an answer, then there is no answer, and you're on.
I got one more for you too. Ready? In college football, how come when they kick a field goal, why don't you challenge the play? The guy was down he was down. He had a knee on the ground. The holder.
There's got to be something in the rule book for that.
Am I right? Am I right or what? Am I right?
Yeah, well, you know what? That right there, if it's not in the rule book, the first time it gets challenged, they won't know what the hell to do.
But you save it for a big spot. You save it for a big spot. You know, game-winning field goal coming up. The guy hits a 55-yarder, and you're like, he was down. His knee was down. And they're like, oh, yeah, I guess it was. This is the stuff that keeps me up at night, Scott. This is the stuff that keeps me up at night.
You should reach out to some college coaches because that's, you know what I feel like? That's something that if he was a college coach, Belichick would figure out.
Yeah, Belichick would figure that absolutely. Well, you're going to see who was he going with Washington or something early in this offseason. But anyway, Scott, I'm gonna hit you up for that answer when you start talking to some of your people here. His name is Scott Orgera. The book is 976-1313, How Sports Phone Launched Careers and Broke New Ground. Scott, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for giving us a couple of minutes here.
Thanks for having me, Bob. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Take care, buddy.
How about that? Thank you to Scott Orgera for giving us an hour there, a great hour. That was as good as it gets right there. Thank you, Scott. And listen, get the book, all right? If you're a New York sports fan, you know all the names. Like he said, you know all the names that worked at this sports phone. Me, I'm I don't really remember it. I kind of like things look familiar when I look through it. But, I mean, some of the stories in there are great. And some of the stuff you learn about some of these guys, like I said, Don LaGreca, right? Who knew he was famous before he did our show? I mean, who knew, right? But anyway, that's going to do it for us today. Thank you for watching, everybody. Remember, don't forget to subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe if you're listening on the audio end on the podcast. You can find us anywhere. Just type Locked Up Sports into Google, type my name, type Brett's name, anything. And pick up a copy of this book, all right? It's a good book. It's worth it. It's worth every page, I promise you. And I haven't steered you wrong on a book yet, right? I haven't steered you wrong. So take my word for this one. That's going to do it for us. Like I said, we'll be back tomorrow. We'll do some Rangers. We'll do some Mets. Yankees keep winning. So thank you again to Scott Orgera. Pick up a copy of the book. You can get it at Amazon. You're going to go to Amazon, right? Like I said every time. If Amazon is a spot where you can get the book, that's where you're going. So go to Amazon, get the book, check it out. It's worth it. That does it for me. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to visit our website, lockedupsports.net, lockedupsports.net. I'm Bob Walters. See ya.